Hi everybody, welcome to Dulcimerica. My name is Bing Futch. Thank you for joining me. We're going to continue our study of some fundamental mountain dulcimer stuff. Today we're going to look at music theory. Now I know a lot of you have probably just joined the mountain dulcimer family. Welcome. And you're probably wondering how to get into this thing. And you know, you can use tablature and be just fine. But I've discovered that just a little bit of music theory knowledge will really help you blossom as a player. So we're going to talk about that today. But before we get down deep into it, I want to say howdy to one of my patrons on Patreon, Linda Terpstra. Linda, thank you very much. I appreciate you and all of my patrons for being a part of my art every single day. You guys are the guys who help make this thing run. All the video, the music, the creation of books, you make it possible. You help things out every single day and take care of all these little things that need to be done. Upgrading equipment, software, getting new stuff so we can continue to put out new stuff. And I think about you guys every single morning and very much appreciate you. So thank you, Linda, for being one of my patrons. And to all my patrons, I got your backs, homies. Now, if you guys are wondering what this whole Patreon thing is about, basically it's a subscription service for my art, my music, video, books, and tablature. It's all yours for just $5 a month, and you get not only everything I've ever created, God, I'm getting choked up, but you can also get everything I create every single week. That means brand new creations going straight to your email box and access for you, behind the scenes stuff and rare stuff that nobody else on the internet is ever going to see or hear unless they become a patron. If you want to check out some free goodies, come on down here to this website, patreon.com/bingfutch. Go to the open house section of the featured tags area and download all this stuff I've been putting up there recently. Think you'll enjoy it, and do please consider becoming a patron like Linda. Thank you again, Linda, very, very much. All right, this is a true story. I've been playing music for over 30 years, and for most of that time, I have not known a whole lot of music theory. In fact, when I was playing in Mojave, I didn't know my scales, chords, any of that stuff, which was very, very disconcerting for the band. They'd say, Bing, what are you playing at measure 18? I'd say, this. I didn't know anything about it. That was not going to work, however, when I began teaching mountain dulcimer at festivals. I had to be able to put words to what I was explaining, these concepts. And so basically, I went and I taught myself. I got some books, I watched some videos, I studied, and I didn't have to go back to school and spend all kinds of money and incur student debt. It's very simple. In fact, I put together a book called Method for Beginning Mountain Dulcimer, available through my website and also through Fullcraft Instruments. And it basically is a music theory book for the mountain dulcimer. It'll have all kinds of graphic detail, lots of imagery, lots of sound backup exercises to truly immerse you in what it's all about. So I know it sounds really daunting, but once you get into it, you can truly learn just enough to be dangerous, and it really opens up your playing quite a bit. So let's talk about music theory, very, very basic stuff, with a very basic fundamental concept that all sound travels through the air at different frequencies. If you were to see a picture of any sound, whether it be a foghorn or the tweeting of a bird, you'd probably seen a waveform. And you can see where when things are quiet, you don't see a lot of motion on the waveform. And when things are loud, the waveform gets really, really big, and it shows just how much volume is going on. Everything, every sound that exists somewhere in a spectrum that can be heard by humans between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. 20 being the low end of the spectrum, that would be bass drums, foghorns, explosions, you know, that type of thing. Boom cars that pass you in traffic. And 20,000 hertz would be way on the other end of the spectrum. That's getting almost to the point where you can't hear it, but dogs can. Somewhere comfortably in the middle of that is where people speak, where music is played, where glass shatters, and when clouds send forth rain pattering along the concrete. That's very poetic, isn't it? All of these sounds live somewhere inside of the spectrum, from low, 20,000 or 20 hertz, to high, 20,000 hertz. That's what our typical human range is. Obviously, at some point, we begin to lose the low and high end of that range, but there's a very reasonable range right there in the middle where a lot of what we do on a daily basis lives. Now, let's take it a step further. Every single point along that spectrum from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz has a particular frequency. Something resonates at that particular frequency. So you could take that big old spectrum of sound and slice it up like a loaf of bread, and every slice would represent a piece of this sound spectrum, and it would be given a name, a frequency name. In fact, you've probably heard of A440. A440 is a couple of things happening at once. One, there's a note name there, so we know we're talking about the note A. We also know that this note in particular is going to be resonating at a frequency of 440 hertz, so it is a very particular A. There are other A's that resonate at different frequencies, like 220 and 880. Those are different A's altogether, but they are still A's, if that makes some sense. And so that's starting to give you a picture of what this whole sound frequency thing, this whole spectrum is all about. So when we talk about notes and pitches, we're talking about two different things. When we're talking about pitches, we're talking about a particular frequency. So we could talk about a note being A and have it be there on the spectrum. We could also say A and it means that note at a different place on the spectrum. It's the same note, but these are different pitches, one low and one high. So when we talk about a pitch, we're talking about how low or how high a note is. The note itself, the word note, is talking about whether it's going to be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or flattened or sharpened, and the duration of that note, quarter note, eighth note, 16th note, that type of thing. So it's important to know the difference between notes and pitches so that when we're talking about these things back and forth, people can get an understanding about where you are coming from. All right, now let's take a look over here at this wonderful mountain dulcimer by Fullcraft Instruments. I got two fretboards here. One is fully chromatic and one is kind of diatonic. I'll explain that in a second. These are both tuned DAD, and in Western music we have what's called the chromatic scale. And a chromatic scale is a series of notes, 12 notes, and these notes can be started at any point, and you can go up 12 notes and get this chromatic scale. All of these notes are a half step apart. So if I were to start from open D, I want you to notice that all of these frets over here, the spacing between them is all about the same. They do get a little closer together as you get higher up on the scale, but these are all half steps. And if I were to play every single note in a row, it would kind of sound like somebody walking up a flight of stairs. Those are 12 different notes right there. Now starting with D, here's what we're looking at. D, D sharp. When we take a note up a half step, we sharpen it. When we take a note down a half step, we flatten it. So we're going from D to D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C, and C sharp. Those are 12 different notes. 12 different notes. Now, if you feel like that shoe hasn't dropped yet, it's because we haven't played the last note, which is the octave. There is D, and we started with a D. Those are both Ds, but one is pitched lower and one is pitched higher. But we have 12 different notes in the chromatic scale. So I could start from F and then go up 12 notes to get a chromatic scale of a different flavor. F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, and F. And F is the octave. So that is a point, that's a frequency point basically. So in that spectrum, we've got all of those notes, and all of those notes all resonate at different frequencies. So they all have different pitches and they're climbing from low to high. So if we've got all these half steps here, you really could write a song that uses all 12 notes of the chromatic scale, and it's been done. It gets really crazy, but we have sort of scaled things back a little bit, no pun intended, to not use all those notes, only using a certain number of notes. And usually these notes are numbered in a scale of 8 or 7 different notes in a diatonic scale. But before I get over to there, I want to show you that we can combine what we're doing here. Instead of going directly to the next note up, a half step up, we can skip notes, and by doing so we are now going a whole step as opposed to a half step. That's a half step interval. An interval is how we describe the distances between notes. We describe their relationship in terms of intervals. That's a minor second interval. That's a half step up. If we skip that half step and go directly up, and we go a whole distance from open to the second fret here, that is an interval of a major second, and that is a whole step. And they sound very different. One sounds sort of sinister, like the theme from Jaws, and one sounds more open and sort of happy. So where does our 7-note do, re, mi scale come from? It actually comes from the chromatic scale. So we don't want to use all the notes. It just makes for messiness. What we want is a scale of 7 different notes plus an octave of the root, or the first note that we began with, and that will be in a number of different keys. So if we're talking about what we call the major scale is a series of whole steps and half steps that are pulled from the chromatic scale and played in order to give us something to work with when we're writing music. So that particular movement of whole steps and half steps goes like this. We start with a note that we want to start with, and that's our root, or the 1, and then we go a full whole step from there. From there, we go another full whole step. From there, we go a half step. After that, we go 3 more whole steps. Boom, boom, boom. And then we have a half step to end the scale. So watch what happens when I go up that chromatic scale, but this time I'm going to hop and skip using that formula. Whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And watch what happens. Starting with D, going a whole step. So we're not going to play the half step up, going to go up here now. Going a whole step now to F sharp. Now a half step to G. Now a whole step to A. Another whole step to B. Another whole step to C sharp. There are the 7 notes of the major scale for D major. And then another half step gets us to our octave right there at D. That's the science of how you create a major scale. Now the same can be done for minor scales, and this is the natural minor. In this case, the formula is whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. And that sounds like this. We're going whole step, right? Then a half step, then a whole step, right? So we got whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, and whole step. And there you have our minor scale coming out of the chromatic. So what's happening there? Notes as they are moving, as we move from note to note, these relationships, these intervals, create feelings. They create character, they create personality, they create harmonies and dissonances. And the way our ears actually hear them, you'll hear them typically as major sounding or minor sounding. So depending on what the next note is, that can often color what the feeling you get from a particular interval or melody or chord is. So just by altering that formula a little bit, will give you all kinds of really, really interesting things going on. Okay, so I hope that made a lot of sense there. Now let's transfer that over from the chromatic dulcimer to diatonic. Now, like I said, this is not fully diatonic. Diatonic basically just means it's a 7-note scale as opposed to the chromatic 12-note scale. But the mountain dulcimer has been adding a lot of frets in the past decade or couple of decades. The 6.5 has become standard, and the 1.5 has become fairly more standard and more common. We also have the 8.5 and the 13.5, and some people also like to add a 0.5 and others all over the place. So this is not completely diatonic on this side, but there are diatonic dulcimers still out there that people play all over the place. So the idea about having a completely diatonic dulcimer is that you don't have to hop and skip. You don't have to use a formula because we've got a collection of whole steps and half steps on this dulcimer. Take a look across and compare the two fretboards. Here you can see that we've got these narrow frets just like are happening on the chromatic side. But you can also see where we have whole steps, where a half step has been omitted, and that leaves us with no choice but to play a whole step. And that happens at a few places here on the dulcimer. So without having that fret and without having that fret, it is very, very easy to simply play a major scale on the mountain dulcimer because it lives at the 3rd fret and it goes through the 10th fret. And I'll show you what I mean. We're going to start off from G here. It's the G major scale. By going from here to here, look at this wide space. There we have our first whole step. Look at this wide space. There's our second whole step. Look at this narrow space. There's our half step. Now, if we didn't have the 6.5 fret, we would just move on to 7. That's a wide space. So there's our whole step. Moving on to our next wide space, which is a whole step. If I didn't have the 8.5 fret, this would be a wide space, so I'd be playing a whole step. And there's our narrow space for the half step. So people playing a pure diatonic mountain dulcimer wouldn't even have to worry about skipping or hopping anywhere. They could simply play notes or frets 3 through 10, one fret after the other without skipping anything, and get a G major scale. However, if you have the 6.5 fret, you have to be careful not to play at the 6.5 fret because you will not be playing the correct scale. So what I mean here is that knowing what you're playing is very important when you're playing chromatically, but it's also important if you're playing on a dulcimer that has some additional choices down there. So let's look at the G major scale again. The G major scale, we talked a little bit about pitches, and that pitches are basically low and high. And notes are going to be the first 7 letters of the Latin alphabet, and then those notes can be different pitches. So we're going to deal with keys now and the scales. Our G major scale we just played, and in order for us to be able to play all these different types of music with these different characters and personalities, we play in different keys. It's been very much proven and embraced that every single key has a different sort of vibe to it. And so people like to play sometimes in the key of C for one reason and play in the key of E flat for another reason. So it's very important for us as mountain dulcimer players to understand at least 3 keys that we're going to play in a lot when we're in DAD tuning, and G is the first one of those. G has 1 sharp, that's F sharp. The reason we have a key signature is so that if you're playing a chromatic instrument, you know which notes to flatten and which notes to sharp. And if you are going to take a note up a half step, it's going to be sharpened. And if you're going to take a note down a half step, it is flattened. And the key of C has no flats and no sharps. So if you were to bounce all over the chromatic fretboard and play nothing but natural notes, C, D, E, F, G, A, and B, then you'd be playing notes out of the C major scale and you'd be playing in the key of C. But when you go over here to the key of G, you now have one sharp in the mix, and that sharp is going to be F sharp. So starting from the 3rd fret, we have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and then G the octave. If you don't have the 8.5 or the 1.5, you really don't have to worry about F sharp because it's going to be right there in front of you and you don't have any options. But if you've got those 2 frets, then you've got the capability of playing F natural, and you have to be careful not to play F natural when you're playing in the key of G because it won't sound right with the rest of the key. So there's our G major scale, and it's all laid out perfectly on the mountain dulcimer. Now let me show you D major. D major is going to have F sharp in it as well, but it's also going to add a C sharp to the mix. So we have 2 sharps in this. We're going to start on the open string melody. There's D, there's E, there's an F sharp, there's G, A, B. Now we're not going to play C because remember we have a C sharp in this key. So we're going to go to the 6.5 fret and play C sharp. And then finally there's our octave, D at the 7th fret. We can use those exact same frets on the middle string to play in the key of A. Now, we already have F sharp and we've added C sharp. Now we're going to add one more sharp to be in the key of A, and that's going to be G sharp, and it lives at the 6.5 fret. So again, we're going to play the exact same frets, starting with A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, and A the octave. It's very helpful to learn where all of your F sharps or where all of your sharps are located, period, when you're in DAD tuning. So I like to point out that the 2nd fret is full of sharps, full of them. We got F sharp on the melody string, C sharp on the middle string, and F sharp on the bass string. The 6.5 fret is also chock full of sharps right there. We've got C sharp on the bass string, G sharp on the middle string, C sharp on the melody string. There's one more sharp hiding in this 1st octave from open to the 7th fret, and it's right there on the middle string at the 5th fret, and that's F sharp. So if you put a little mental Post-it note up here that all of your sharps are living in DAD tuning in the 1st octave between the 7th fret and open, 2nd fret full of sharps, 6.5 fret full of sharps, and 5th fret middle string F sharp. If you just sear those into your memory, I can guarantee you that this whole process is going to be a lot easier as you go down the road when you're in DAD tuning. Of course, when we changed these strings, we changed the tuning down to CGC or take it up to EBE. That all changes as soon as we change the pitches of these strings. When we change the tuning, all of that will go away. But for DAD tuning, this is gospel. So make sure that you make a note of that as we go along. Okay, so I've showed you how to play the 3 most important scales for us as mountain dulcimer players in DAD tuning, because those scales, G major, D major, and A major, all go hand in hand with the 3 major chords that we tend to play over and over again when playing in DAD tuning, and that's G major, D major, and A major. So I hope that makes sense right there about the scales, where to find them, and how to build them. If you get yourself a chromatic dulcimer, you can find these same scales, but you'll have to hunt, pick and choose, and basically just use that formula I showed you with the whole steps and the half steps for major scales and for minor scales as well. So we covered what pitches are, and we covered what notes are. And just to reiterate about the notes, we use the first 7 letters of the alphabet, A through G. So anytime that you're trying to figure out how to work up what key you're playing in or what that scale might be, say you're playing in the key of F, then you simply start with F, and then you go to G, and then you're going to wrap around. Instead of going on to H, you'll start over at the beginning of the alphabet until you come back to where you started. So we'd go F, G, A, B, C, D, E. There are your 7 notes. And then we come back to F. Then you'd have to look at the key signature of that particular key and find out which of those notes are going to be flattened or sharpened. In the case of the key of F, B flat is going to be your 4th note. So you'd go F, G, A, B flat, then C, D, and E to round out the scale. So once you kind of put those things together, you can actually figure out a lot of this stuff on your own just by experimenting and doing some stuff. But because we're not a chromatic instrument, the mountain dulcimer cannot play in just any old key. We have to be specifically, when we're in DAD tuning, in the keys of D, G, A, to have all the chords and to have all the scales, to have all the notes that we need. And we can also play in the relative minors of those 3 keys. In the case of G major, the relative minor is E minor. In the case of D major, the relative minor is B minor. And in the case of A major, the relative minor is F sharp minor. And what a relative minor is, basically, it is a different scale. It's a minor scale, and it follows that interval relationship of whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. And a minor scale and a major scale, these are related. They share the exact same key signature, and they use the exact same notes. You just begin those notes, or you begin the scale at a different location. And because you do, one scale sounds up and happy, and one scale sounds sort of down and serious. I'll give you a good example of that by playing a 2-octave D major scale. So watch this. I'm going to start from the bass string, work my way over to the middle string, and then finally end up on the melody string to play 2 octaves, 2 full octaves of D major. All right, were you guys watching? Now, nothing up my sleeve because I'm not wearing sleeves. Going to do the exact same thing, but I'm going to start now from the 6th note of the D major scale, which is B. So I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6th note of the scale, there's B. Now I'm going to take the exact same path that I did before. I'm not going to change anything. But now, because I'm starting from B as opposed to starting from D, listen to the quality of the scale. What happened? Well, I'm playing the exact same notes, but I'm starting in a different place. And because the first note that's being registered is B, by the time I get to my 3rd note, it sounds different and it feels different because the intervals, the relationships between those notes have changed due to the fact that we have started in a different location. That's all it takes to create this really amazing phenomenon. So every single major scale or every major key that we can play in, we also have a relative minor key that we can play in as well. That gives the mountain dulcimer 6 total keys where you can play all the chords, all the scales, and everything needed to function within that. Now, can we fake it in lots of other keys? Yes, we can. We can play in the key of B, we can play in the key of E, we can play in the key of F sharp. We don't have all the notes, we don't have all the scales, but we can fake it real good. But that's for an upcoming episode to be sure. So I hope this makes a lot of sense, and I hope that you'll be able to use this information. We're going to continue on with this in the next episode when I show you how to build chords and what the different types of chords are, because that is where the rubber truly hits the road. Again, thank you guys very much for tuning in. Play a little bit every day and have fun while you're out there. Until next time, this has been Futch. We'll see ya.